Some say love only comes once, and Miss Evelyn Marsh had long accepted that her chance had passed with her late husband. In the dusty town of Dry River, 1887, the 57-year-old schoolteacher had made peace with her quiet life until Jasper Langley rode into town with a shocking proposal. The wealthy cattleman needed a respectable wife, and she needed security, so he boldly declared. What started as an insulting business arrangement slowly became something neither expected. Two hearts that had learned to protect themselves began to wonder if second chances were possible after all. But when the whole town is watching and past wounds run deep, can love bloom between two people who thought their time had passed? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Dry River, painting the weathered storefronts in shades of amber and gold. Miss Evelyn Marsh stepped carefully down the wooden boardwalk, her dark blue dress rustling softly with each measured step. At 57, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of a woman who had learned to find strength in solitude, her graying auburn hair pinned neatly beneath a simple bonnet that had seen better years but remained respectable. The one-room schoolhouse stood at the edge of town like a faithful sentinel, its white-painted walls beginning to show the wear of prairie winds and unforgiving summers. Evelyn pushed open the heavy wooden door, breathing in the familiar scent of chalk dust and well-worn books. Her teaching slate-smooth from years of use arrested against the blackboard where she had left it the evening before, a testament to her unwavering dedication to the children of Dry River. "Good morning, Miss Marsh," called young Jenny Patterson as she bounded through the door, her blonde braids dancing behind her. At 8 years old, Jenny possessed the kind of boundless energy that reminded Evelyn of springtime after a harsh winter. "Good morning, Jenny," Evelyn replied, her voice carrying the warmth she reserved for her students. "Did you remember to bring your arithmetic slate today?" Jenny nodded enthusiastically, pulling the small slate from her worn cloth bag. Behind her, the other children began filing in 12 students, ranging in age from 6 to 14, each carrying the hopes and dreams of families who understood that education was the key to a better future on the frontier. As the children settled into their wooden desks, Evelyn moved to her own worn chair behind the teaching table. Her fingers unconsciously brushed against the small drawer where she kept her most treasured possession, a leather-bound Bible that had belonged to her mother. Between its pages, pressed carefully between the verses of 1 Corinthians, lay a single wildflower. The delicate bloom had once been part of her wedding bouquet, a symbol of the brief but beautiful marriage she had shared with Thomas Marsh 15 years ago. The morning lessons passed in their familiar rhythm. Evelyn guided the younger children through their letters while the older students worked on composition. She moved between the desks with practiced ease, offering encouragement here, gentle correction there. This was her world ordered, purposeful, and safe. At noon, the children scattered for their dinner break, their voices fading as they ran toward homes where mothers waited with simple meals and fathers worked hard to carve out a living from the unforgiving land. Evelyn remained at her desk, opening the small tin that contained her own modest meal: bread, a small piece of cheese, and an apple from the tree behind her boarding house. The boarding house where she lived was run by Mrs. Caldwell, a widow in her 70s, whose tongue moved faster than a hummingbird's wings. The woman meant no harm, but her love of gossip made Evelyn grateful for the privacy of her small room on the second floor. "Another quiet lunch, I see," came a voice from the doorway. Mayor Henderson stepped into the schoolhouse, removing his hat in the presence of a lady. A man in his 60s with kind eyes and a gentle manner, he had always treated Evelyn with the respect due to an educated womana, courtesy not always extended by every man in town. "Mayor Henderson, what brings you by today?" Evelyn asked, setting down her bread. "Oh, just checking on our town's most valuable citizen," he said with a smile. "The children are fortunate to have you, Miss Marsh. Not many teachers would stay in a place like Dry River for 7 years. Evelyn nodded, accepting the compliment gracefully. She had indeed stayed longer than most teachers who came through frontier towns. Usually, they married within a year or two, or moved on to larger settlements with better prospects. But Evelyn had found something here, that she treasured: a sense of purpose and a community that had slowly become home. "The children need stability," she said simply. "Change is hard enough when you're young." After the mayor left, Evelyn walked to the window and gazed out at the town she had come to know so well. Dry River wasn't much to look at: a collection of wooden buildings arranged along a single main street, with houses scattered beyond like seeds blown by the wind. The general store stood directly across from the schoolhouse, its wide porch serving as an informal gathering place for the men who had time to sit and talk. Beyond the buildings, the endless prairie stretched toward distant mountains, a reminder of just how small and isolated their community really was. This evening would follow the same pattern as all her evenings. She would walk the 3 blocks to Mrs. Caldwell's boarding house, where she would take her supper in the common room while listening to whatever gossip the older woman had collected during the day. Then she would retreat to her small room, light her oil lamp, and settle into her rocking chair with a book. Her room was simple but comfortable: a narrow bed with a quilt she had stitched herself, a small writing desk by the window, and a bookshelf that held her most prized possessions: volumes of poetry, philosophy, and literature that she had collected over the years. These books were her companions during the long winter evenings, when the wind howled across the prairie and the world outside seemed frozen in time. But lately, if she were honest with herself, the evening quiet had begun to feel more like loneliness than peace. She was 57 years old, and while she had made peace with spinsterhood after Thomas's death, there were moments when she wondered what it would be like to share her thoughts with someone, to have a conversation that went beyond the weather or the children's progress in their studies. Thomas had been gone for 15 years now, taken by a fever that swept through their previous town like wildfire. Their marriage had lasted only 3 years, but they had been good, years filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the kind of easy companionship that made even ordinary moments feel special. She still remembered the way he would read aloud to her in the evenings, his voice giving life to the words on the page. After his death, she had packed up their few belongings and accepted the teaching position in Dry River. It was a fresh start, a place where no one knew her as poor Mrs. Marsh or looked at her with pitying eyes. Here, she was simply Miss Marsh, the schoolteacher, respected, useful, and independent. That independence had become precious to her. She earned her own wages, made her own decisions, and answered to no one but herself and her students. Many women her age would consider such a life incomplete, but Evelyn had found contentment in its simplicity. As she prepared to dismiss the children for the day, young Billy Thompson raised his hand. "Miss Marsh, my pa says there's a rich cattleman coming to town. Says he owns more land than anyone in the territory." "Is that so?" Evelyn replied, helping little Sarah with her books. "Well, I suppose all sorts of people pass through Dry River. Pa says he's looking to settle down," Jenny added, her eyes bright with the excitement that children feel when adults discuss mysterious happenings. "Says he's got a big ranch and everything." Evelyn smiled at their enthusiasm. Children always found such stories fascinating, though she herself paid little attention to the comings and goings of cattlemen and businessmen. Her world was contained here in the schoolhouse, and that suited her perfectly. That evening, as she walked home through the dusty streets, she noticed more activity than usual around the saloon and the general store. Men stood in small groups, talking in voices that carried the excitement of news being shared. She caught fragments of conversation, something about cattle, land deals, and a man named Langley. In her room that night, she settled into her routine with the same quiet satisfaction she had felt for 7 years. She opened her Bible and carefully turned the pages until she reached the pressed wildflower. The petals had faded to a pale yellow, but they remained intact, a reminder of a love that had been real, even if it had been brief. "Grant that I may find contentment in the life you have given me," she whispered, as she had every night since Thomas's death. It was a prayer that had sustained her through years of solitude, and she had no reason to believe that tomorrow would be any different from today. But as she extinguished her lamp and settled into sleep, she could not have imagined that her orderly, peaceful world was about to be turned upside down by a man she had never met, a man whose blunt honesty and unexpected vulnerability would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, security, and second chances. The sound of hoofbeats on the main street drew Evelyn's attention away from the arithmetic lesson she was conducting with her older students. Through the schoolhouse window, she watched as a lone rider approached at a steady pace, his horse kicking up small clouds of dust that caught the afternoon sunlight. The man sat tall in his saddle, and even from a distance, Evelyn could see that everything about him spoke of wealth and authority. His horse was a magnificent bay stallion, its coat gleaming with good care and proper feeding. The rider's clothes, though practical, were of fine quality, a black hat that had never seen a day of hard labor, boots that showed expert craftsmanship, and a coat that fit his broad shoulders with precision. "Children, please continue with your sums," Evelyn said quietly, though she found herself unable to look away from the window. Something about the way the man rode with purpose and determination suggested that Dry River was not merely a stop on his journey, but his intended destination. The rider pulled his horse to a halt directly in front of the general store, dismounting with the fluid grace of someone who had spent countless hours in the saddle. As he turned toward the store, Evelyn caught a glimpse of his profile, strong, jawed, weathered by sun and wind, with silver threading through dark hair beneath his hat. This was clearly a man accustomed to command, someone who made decisions quickly and expected them to be respected. From his vest pocket, he withdrew what appeared to be a silver pocket watch, checking the time with the same deliberate precision that marked all his movements. Even this simple gesture spoke of a man who valued punctuality and order, qualities that, despite herself, Evelyn found admirable. "Miss Marsh," young Billy Thompson whispered urgently. "That's him. That's the cattleman my pa was talking about." Several other children had noticed the arrival as well, their attention divided between their arithmetic and the drama unfolding outside. Evelyn gently redirected their focus to their lessons, though she continued to observe the stranger with growing curiosity. The man disappeared into the general store, and for nearly an hour, Evelyn managed to concentrate on her teaching duties. But when the school day ended and she stepped outside to bid farewell to her students, she found herself face to face with a scene that would forever change the quiet rhythm of her life. The stranger stood on the wooden boardwalk in front of the general store, his imposing figure drawing the attention of everyone within sight. Mayor Henderson was there, along with several other prominent townsmen, but it was clear that the newcomer commanded the center of attention. His voice, when he spoke, carried the authority of a man accustomed to being heard. "Gentlemen," he was saying, his tone businesslike and direct, "I appreciate your welcome to Dry River. My ranch lies 20 miles south of here, and I intend to become a permanent part of this community." It was then that his gaze fell upon Evelyn as she guided her students toward their homes. She felt the weight of his attention like a physical presence, and something in his steady regard made her acutely aware of her appearance, her simple dress, her practical bonnet, the small stack of books she carried in her arms. To her surprise, the man stepped down from the boardwalk and approached her directly, removing his hat in a gesture of respect that seemed automatic rather than calculated. "You would be the schoolteacher," he said, and it was a statement rather than a question. Up close, she could see that his eyes were a striking blue, gray like storm clouds over the prairie. His face bore the lines of a man who had lived hard and worked harder, but there was intelligence there, and something else, weariness that spoke of losses endured and loneliness accepted. "I am Miss Marsh," she replied, inclining her head slightly. "And you are?" "Jasper Langley," he said, and the name carried weight even in this small frontier town. "I own the Double L Ranch south of here." Evelyn had heard the name whispered in the weeks leading up to his arrival. Jasper Langley was said to be one of the wealthiest cattlemen in the territory, a man who had built his empire through shrewdness, hard work, and an unwillingness to accept failure. What she had not expected was the directness of his manner, or the way his presence seemed to command attention without effort. "Mr. Langley," she acknowledged, aware that their conversation was being observed by half the town. Mrs. Caldwell had emerged from her boarding house and stood watching from across the street, her sharp eyes missing nothing. What happened next left Evelyn speechless and the entire gathering of townspeople stunned into silence. "Miss Marsh," Jasper Langley said, his voice carrying clearly across the dusty street, "I've come to town with a proposition for you. I need a wifer, respectable, intelligent woman who can help me establish the kind of household that befits a man of my position. You, I'm told, need the security that comes with marriage to a man of means. I propose we enter into an arrangement that would benefit us both." The words hung in the air like dust after a windstorm, settling slowly into the consciousness of everyone present. Evelyn felt her face flush with a mixture of shock and anger, aware that dozens of eyes were fixed upon her, waiting for her response. "Mr. Langley," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil within her, "I believe you have been misinformed about my circumstances. I neither need nor desire the kind of arrangement you describe." But Jasper Langley was not easily deterred. He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, but not enough to prevent the eager listeners from hearing every word. "Miss Marsh, I'm a practical man, and I believe you're a practical woman. You've been teaching in this town for 7 years, living in a boarding house, depending on the goodwill of a school board that could replace you at any time. I'm offering you a home of your own, financial security, and the respect that comes with being Mrs. Jasper Langley. In return, I need a wife who can manage my household, represent my interests in social matters, and help me establish the kind of family life that's appropriate for a man in my position." The boldness of his proposal was matched only by its public nature. Evelyn realized that half of Dry River was witnessing what amounted to a business negotiation disguised as a marriage proposal. The humiliation of it struck her like a physical blow. "Mr. Langley," she said, her voice growing colder with each word, "I am not a commodity to be bartered for your social convenience, nor am I so desperate for security that I would enter into a loveless arrangement with a stranger. I suggest you look elsewhere for the kind of wife you seem to require." With that, she turned and walked away, her spine straight and her head held high, despite the burning embarrassment that threatened to overwhelm her composure. Behind her, she could hear the murmur of excited voices as the townspeople began to digest what they had just witnessed. In her room that evening, Evelyn sat in her rocking chair, staring out at the darkening prairie and trying to make sense of what had happened. The man's proposal had been insulting in its assumption that she was available for such an arrangement, yet there had been something in his manner, a straightforwardness that was almost refreshing in its honesty, that prevented her from dismissing him entirely. Jasper Langley was clearly a man accustomed to getting what he wanted through direct action and clear communication. In his world, she realized, marriage was probably viewed as just another business arrangement, a practical matter to be settled efficiently and without unnecessary sentiment. But what disturbed her most was not his proposal itself, but the small voice in her mind that whispered of possibilities she had long ago dismissed. Security, a home of her own, the companionship of a man who, whatever his faults, possessed intelligence and determination. These were not things to be dismissed lightly by a woman of 57, with few prospects and limited means. Yet the very practical nature of his offer felt like a betrayal of everything she had shared with Thomas. Their love had been real, passionate, despite its brevity, built on mutual affection and respect. How could she even consider entering into an arrangement that reduced marriage to a mere transaction? As she prepared for bed, she opened her Bible and looked once more at the pressed wildflower. The delicate petals seemed to mock her with their faded beauty, a reminder of what she had lost and what she would never have again. But even as she whispered her nightly prayer for contentment, she found her thoughts returning to Jasper Langley's storm-grey eyes and the loneliness she had glimpsed therein. Loneliness that perhaps matched her own. The following morning brought with it the kind of attention Evelyn had hoped never to experience in Dry River. Before she had even finished her breakfast at Mrs. Caldwell's boarding house, 3 different women had found excuses to visit, each eager to discuss the previous day's extraordinary events. "My dear," Mrs. Caldwell said as she poured Evelyn's coffee, her eyes bright with barely contained excitement, "I've lived in this town for 30 years, and I've never seen anything like it. A man of Jasper Langley's standing making such a public declaration, why, it's the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed." "Romantic?" Evelyn nearly choked on her coffee. "Mrs. Caldwell." The man spoke of marriage as if he were negotiating the purchase of cattle. "Oh, but think of the practical benefits," interjected Mrs. Peterson, who had arrived ostensibly to borrow sugar, but clearly had other motives. "A woman your age, Miss Marsh, forgive my directness, but such opportunities don't come along often, and Jasper Langley is known to be a man of his word." The third visitor, Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife, took a different approach. "Of course, Evelyn, you must do what feels right in your heart. But I will say this, that man didn't strike me as someone who makes impulsive decisions. If he chose you, he must see qualities that recommend you specifically." Evelyn excused herself as politely as possible and made her way to the schoolhouse, hoping that the familiar routine of teaching would provide refuge from the unwanted attention. But even her students seemed affected by the excitement that had gripped the town. "Miss Marsh," Jenny Patterson asked during the morning geography lesson, "are you really going to marry the cattleman?" "Jenny, that is not an appropriate question for the classroom," Evelyn replied firmly, though she could see the curiosity in every young face turned toward her. It was during the noon recess that Jasper Langley appeared again, this time approaching the schoolhouse with a more measured pace than his dramatic arrival the previous day. Evelyn watched through the window as he dismounted and stood for a moment, seeming to gather his thoughts before approaching the building. When he knocked on the door, she considered not answering, but her ingrained courtesy won out over her desire to avoid further confrontation. "Miss Marsh," he said, removing his hat as he stepped into the schoolhouse, "I wonder if I might have a word with you." "Mr. Langley, I believe I made my position clear yesterday," she replied, remaining behind her desk as if it could provide some protection against his overwhelming presence. "You did indeed," he acknowledged, "and I realize my approach was less than graceful. I'm not a man accustomed to such negotiations, and I handled the matter poorly." The admission surprised her. She had expected him to argue or persist with the same blunt approach, not to acknowledge any fault in his methods. "I see," she said carefully. "The truth is, Miss Marsh, I've spent most of my adult life dealing with cattle, land, and business matters. My skills in approaching a lady of quality are, I admit, somewhat lacking." He paused, running his fingers along the brim of his hat. "I was hoping you might allow me to begin again, with more appropriate consideration for your sensibilities." Before Evelyn could respond, the sound of children's voices announced the end of recess. Her students filed into the classroom, their eyes widening as they noticed the tall stranger standing near their teacher's desk. What happened next revealed a side of Jasper Langley that Evelyn had not expected. Instead of making his excuses and leaving, he remained, watching with genuine interest as she guided the children through their afternoon lessons. When young Timothy struggled with his reading, stumbling over the words in his primer, Jasper stepped forward. "May I?" he asked quietly, and at Evelyn's nod, he knelt beside the boy's desk. "You know, son," he said, his voice gentler than Evelyn had yet heard it, "I wasn't much good at reading when I was your age either. The letters seemed to jump around on the page like spooked horses." Timothy looked up at him with interest. "Really, mister?" "Really, but my mother taught me a trick. She said to slow down and look at each word like it was a brand on a horse's flank. Take your time, see the shape of it, and pretty soon you'll recognize it from across the pasture." The boy tried again, this time with more patience, and managed to read 3 full sentences without stumbling. The smile that crossed his face was matched by the quiet satisfaction in Jasper's eyes. After the children were dismissed for the day, Evelyn found herself alone with Jasper once more. The easy way he had interacted with Timothy had shown her something unexpected, a man capable of patience and kindness, qualities that seemed at odds with his earlier businesslike approach to marriage. "That was well done," she said, beginning to gather her materials from the day's lessons. "I like children," he replied simply. "They speak honestly, and they don't pretend to be something they're not." The comment seemed pointed, and Evelyn looked at him more closely. "And you believe adults do pretend, Mr. Langley?" "In my experience, yes. But not you, Miss Marsh. Yesterday you told me exactly what you thought of my proposal, even though half the town was listening. I respect that kind of honesty." As he prepared to leave, he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew something wrapped in a piece of soft cloth. "I made this for the boy Timothy. He seems like he could use some encouragement." He unwrapped a small wooden horse, carved with remarkable skill and attention to detail. The little figure was perfectly proportioned, with a flowing mane and an expression that somehow conveyed both strength and gentleness. "You carved this?" Evelyn asked, surprised by the artistry of the piece. "I whittle in the evenings," he said, almost embarrassed by her attention to the craftsmanship. "Keeps my hands busy and gives me something to think about besides cattle and land deals." The admission revealed yet another unexpected facet of his character. A man who spent his evenings carving wooden horses was not the cold businessman she had initially perceived him to be. "Timothy will treasure this," she said, accepting the gift. "It's beautiful work." "Miss Marsh," he said as he prepared to mount his horse, "I know I handled yesterday badly, but I hope you'll consider giving me another chance to present my case more appropriately this time." After he rode away, Evelyn remained in the schoolhouse, turning the wooden horse over in her hands. The piece was not only skillfully crafted, but created with obvious care and affection. She found herself wondering about a man who could build a cattle empire during the day and spend his evenings creating delicate toys for children he barely knew. That evening, as she sat in her room with her Bible open to the familiar page, she studied the pressed wildflower with new thoughts stirring in her mind. Jasper Langley was not the man she had first judged him to be, and his proposal, while still shocking in its directness, began to seem less like an insult and more like the awkward attempt of a lonely man to find companionship. But even as she acknowledged this shift in her thinking, she remained troubled by the practical nature of his offer. Could she truly consider a marriage built on mutual need rather than mutual love? And what did it say about her own character that she was even entertaining such thoughts? The wooden horse sat on her nightstand, a reminder that people were often more complex than their first impressions suggested, and that perhaps, just perhaps, there was more to Jasper Langley's proposal than met the eye. 3 days passed before Jasper Langley appeared at the schoolhouse again, and when he did, his approach was markedly different from his previous visits. This time, he waited until the children had been dismissed, and Evelyn had finished organizing her materials before approaching the building. "Miss Marsh," he called from outside, "I wonder if you might spare a few minutes for conversation." When she emerged, she found him standing beside his horse, hat in hand, with an expression that seemed almost uncertain, striking contrast to the commanding presence he had displayed during their first encounter. "I've been thinking about our previous conversations," he began, "and I realize I've been going about this all wrong. A woman of your intelligence and independence deserves more consideration than I've shown." Evelyn studied his face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculated charm, but found only what appeared to be genuine regret. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Langley?" "A proper courtship," he said simply, "or at least as proper as circumstances allow. I'd like the opportunity to know you as a person, not just as a solution to a problem. And I'd like you to know many faults as well as my qualities before you make any decisions about my proposal." The sincerity of his request caught her off guard. "And what would such a courtship entail?" "Dinner to start. Mrs. Henderson has kindly offered to serve as chaperone, if you're amenable. Nothing elaborate, just an opportunity for 2 adults to have an honest conversation about what we might offer each other." Evelyn found herself considering the proposal more seriously than she had expected. The man standing before her was not the arrogant cattle baron who had publicly announced his intentions 3 days earlier. This Jasper Langley seemed genuinely interested in her as a person, not merely as a means to an end. "Very well," she said finally, "but I have conditions." "Name them." "This is not an acceptance of your marriage proposal, merely an agreement to become better acquainted. You will not present this dinner to the town as anything more than it is. And if I decide at any point that we are not well suited, you will accept that decision gracefully and without argument." "Agreed," he said without hesitation. "Tomorrow evening, then? 7 o'clock at the mayor's house?" The following evening, Evelyn took special care with her appearance, choosing her best dresser deep green wool that brought out the color of her eye sand, arranging her hair with more attention than usual. She told herself it was simply a matter of proper etiquette, but she could not entirely ignore the flutter of nervous anticipation in her stomach. Mayor Henderson's house was one of the finest in Dry River, with a proper dining room and furniture that spoke of refinement and prosperity. Miss Henderson had prepared a meal that would have done credit to a much larger town, and she bustled about with obvious pleasure at hosting such an important social event. Jasper arrived precisely at 7, wearing a dark suit that transformed him from a working cattleman into a gentleman of obvious substance. His hair had been carefully combed, and his boots polished to a shine that reflected the lamplight. "Miss Marsh," he said, offering a slight bow that managed to be respectful without seeming mockingly formal. "You look lovely this evening." The compliment was delivered with such straightforward sincerity that Evelyn felt her cheeks warm with pleasure. It had been many years since a man had looked at her with the kind of appreciative attention she saw in Jasper's eyes. Dinner conversation began tentatively, with Mayor Henderson guiding the discussion towards safe topics: the weather, the town's growth, the challenges of frontier life. But as the evening progressed, Jasper began to reveal more of himself than Evelyn had expected. "I wasn't always a cattleman," he said in response to her question about his background. "Started out as a blacksmith's apprentice back in Missouri. Learned that I had a talent for working with my hands, but not much patience for taking orders from other men." "What changed?" Evelyn asked, genuinely curious about the path that had led him to his current prosperity. "My first wife, Margaret, died in the cholera epidemic of '68, he said quietly, his fork pausing halfway to his mouth. "We'd been married only 2 years, but she'd always talked about going west, seeing the open country. After she passed, I figured I owed it to her memory to make that journey." The admission hung in the air for a moment, and Evelyn felt something shift in her understanding of the man across from her. His proposal was not the whim of a wealthy man seeking convenience, it was the action of a widower who understood loss and loneliness as intimately as she did. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said softly. 2 years is not nearly long enough for a happy marriage." "No," he agreed, meeting her eyes directly. "But long enough to know what I'm missing. What about you, Miss Marsh? Mrs. Henderson mentioned that you were widowed as well." Evelyn felt her fingers tighten around her napkin. Discussing Thomas with this man felt like a betrayal of sorts, yet she found herself wanting to share the truth of her own experience. "My husband Thomas was a teacher, like myself," she began slowly. "We met at a teachers' conference in Kansas City and discovered we shared a love of literature and learning. Our marriage was comfortable. We read together in the evenings, discussed philosophy and poetry. He was a gentleman, thoughtful and kind. But brief, like mine," Jasper observed. 3 years. He died of a fever." She paused, then added with painful honesty, "Sometimes I wonder if I've idealized our time together. When you lose someone young, it's easy to forget the ordinary moments and remember only the perfect ones." "I do the same thing," Jasper admitted. "Margaret becomes more perfect in my memory with each passing year. But lately, I've begun to think that remembering only the perfection does a disservice to what we actually had, which was real and human and sometimes difficult." The conversation continued well into the evening, touching on subjects Evelyn had not discussed with anyone in years. Jasper spoke of his struggles to build his ranch, the loneliness of success achieved without anyone to share it. She found herself talking about her love of teaching, her pride in her independence, and her fear that she had become too set in her ways to adapt to a different kind of life. When the evening ended and Jasper escorted her back to the boarding house, Evelyn felt as though she had spent time with an entirely different person than the one who had made that shocking public proposal. "Thank you for a pleasant evening," she said as they stood on the boarding house porch. "Thank you for giving me the chance to make a better impression," he replied. "Miss Marsh, I hope you'll consider allowing me to call on you again. Not to press my suit, but simply because I've enjoyed your company more than I have anyone's in a very long time." That night, Evelyn sat with her mother's recipe book open in her lap, running her fingers over the familiar handwriting that detailed instructions for apple pie, beef stew, and cornbread. These recipes represented the domestic life she had shared with Thomas, the quiet routines of keeping house and caring for a husband. But as she turned the pages, she found herself imagining what it might be like to cook for Jasper Langley, to create a home that would welcome him after long days, managing his vast holdings. The thought was both frightening and oddly appealing, a return to the kind of partnership she had thought she would never have again. 2 weeks of carefully supervised visits had passed when Jasper extended an invitation that both excited and intimidated Evelyn beyond measure. "I'd like you to see the ranch," he said as they walked along the edge of town after another pleasant dinner at the Henderson house. "Not for any improper purpose. Miguel, my foreman, and his wife Carmen live in the main house with me, so there would be proper supervision. But I think you should see what I'm offering before you make any decisions about our future." The word "our" sent an unexpected thrill through Evelyn's chest, though she tried to maintain her composure. Over the past fortnight, she had come to look forward to their conversations with an anticipation that surprised her. Jasper Langley was proving to be a man of considerable depth, well-read, despite his practical education, thoughtful about the complexities of frontier life, and possessed of a dry humor that often caught her off guard. "I would like that," she admitted, "though I should mention that I've never been much of a horsewoman." "We'll take the wagon," he assured her. "It'll give us time to talk during the journey." The following Saturday dawned clear and crisp, with the kind of autumn air that made the distant mountains seem close enough to touch. Jasper arrived promptly at 9 o'clock, with a well-maintained wagon drawn by 2 sturdy horses, the entire outfit speaking of the same careful attention to quality that marked everything else in his life. The journey to the Double L Ranch took them through country that Evelyn had never seen, despite living in Dry River for 7 years. As they traveled south, the landscape opened up into vast rolling hills, dotted with cattle that looked like small dark specks against the golden grass. "How many head do you run?" Evelyn asked, genuinely curious about the scope of his operation. "About 3,000, give or take," Jasper replied, handling the reins with casual expertise. "Started with 50 head and a piece of land nobody else wanted. Took me 15 years to build it up to what it is now." "That's a remarkable accomplishment," she said, and meant it. The sheer magnitude of managing such an enterprise was beyond her experience, but she could appreciate the dedication and intelligence it must have required. As they crested a hill, the ranch buildings came into view, and Evelyn felt her breath catch in her throat. The main house was larger than anything in Dry Riviera, 2-story structure built of solid timber with a wide front porch that offered commanding views of the surrounding countryside. Beyond it stood a collection of outbuildings that spoke of a working operation: barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and storage facilities, arranged with the kind of practical efficiency that suggested careful planning. "It's magnificent," she said softly, and saw Jasper's face brighten with pride. "It's taken a lot of work," he acknowledged, "but I'm proud of what I've built here." He helped her down from the wagon with the same careful courtesy he had shown throughout their courtship, his hands lingering perhaps a moment longer than strictly necessary at her waist. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through her, a reminder that she was still a woman capable of responding to a man's touch. The first person to greet them was Miguel Vasquez, a man in his 40s with graying temples and intelligent dark eyes. His manner toward Jasper was respectful but comfortable, suggesting a relationship built on mutual trust rather than mere employer-employee dynamics. "Miguel, I'd like you to meet Miss Marsh," Jasper said. "Miss Marsh, Miguel has been my foreman for 8 years and pretty much keeps this place running while I'm off playing cattle baron." Miguel removed his hat and offered a slight bow. "Señorita Marsh, it is an honor. Jasper has spoken of you often." "Has he indeed?" Evelyn replied, shooting an amused glance at Jasper, who had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Only good things, I assure you," Miguel said with a grin that suggested he enjoyed his employer's discomfort. "My wife Carmen is preparing dinner. She is very eager to meet the woman who has captured Jasper's attention." As they toured the ranch, Evelyn was struck by the obvious respect Jasper commanded from his workers. Men touched their hats when he passed, but their greetings were warm rather than fearful. He knew most of them by name and asked about their families with genuine interest. "You have a good relationship with your men," she observed as they watched a group of cowboys working with a particularly spirited horse. "A man can't run a place like this through fear or intimidation," Jasper replied. "These men work hard, and they deserve to be treated with respect. Most of them have been with me for years. They're more like family than employees." The statement revealed yet another aspect of his character that impressed her. Despite his wealth and position, he had not allowed success to make him arrogant or dismissive of those who worked for him. Inside the main house, Evelyn was amazed by the comfort and refinement Jasper had created. The furnishings were of excellent quality without being ostentatious, and the rooms were arranged with an eye for both beauty and practicality. But what struck her most was how empty it felt, like a stage set waiting for actors to bring it to life. "It's a beautiful home," she said as they stood in the large front parlor, "but it feels lonely," Jasper finished for her. "Yes, I know. I built it thinking that size and quality would somehow fill the emptiness, but a house needs more than furniture to make it a home." From his vest pocket, he withdrew a small leather folder and opened it to reveal a faded photograph. The image showed a young woman with dark hair and laughing eyes, posed in the formal manner of studio portraits. "Margaret," he said simply. "I've carried this for 18 years, but lately I've been thinking it might be time to put it away. Not to forget her, but to make room for new memories." The admission was deeply personal, and Evelyn felt honored that he had chosen to share it with her. She understood the difficulty of moving beyond the memory of a lost spouse. She still wore Thomas's ring on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her dress. "She was beautiful," Evelyn said softly. "She was. But she's been gone a long time, and I'm tired of living with ghosts." He closed the folder and returned it to his pocket. "I want to build something new, Evelyn. Something real and lasting with someone who understands what it means to start over." The use of her given name was deliberate and intimate, marking a shift in their relationship that both acknowledged and encouraged. For the first time since Thomas's death, Evelyn allowed herself to imagine what it might be like to be desired again, to be part of a partnership that could grow and deepen over time. Dinner with Miguel and Carmen was a revelation. The older couple's obvious affection for Jasper showed him in yet another light as a man capable of inspiring loyalty and genuine friendship. Their easy inclusion of Evelyn in their conversation made her feel welcomed rather than merely tolerated. As the evening drew to a close and Jasper prepared to drive her back to town, Evelyn found herself reluctant to leave the warmth and comfort of the ranch house. For the first time in years, she had spent an entire day feeling like part of a family, rather than a solitary individual making her way in the world. "Thank you for today," she said as they settled into the wagon for the journey back to Dry River. "Your home is lovely, and your friends made me feel very welcome." "They're not just my friends, Evelyn," Jasper said quietly. "If you were to accept my proposal, they would become your friends as well. This whole place would become yours as much as mine." The possibility hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed, and for the first time, Evelyn found herself seriously considering what it might mean to step across it. The autumn social at the Dry River Community Hall marked the first time Jasper and Evelyn would appear together as a couple in full view of the entire town. For weeks, their careful courtship had been conducted under the watchful but discreet supervision of the Hendersons, but tonight would be different. Tonight, they would face the collective scrutiny of every family in the territory. Evelyn stood before her small mirror, adjusting the burgundy dress she had worn to only the most important occasions during her 7 years in Dry River. The color brought warmth to her complexion and complemented the silver threads that now decorated her auburn hair. Around her neck, hidden beneath the modest neckline of her dress, Thomas's wedding ring hung on its familiar chain-a-weight. She had grown so accustomed to that she barely noticed it anymore. Yet tonight, she found herself acutely aware of its presence, as if the simple gold band were questioning her right to stand beside another man. To allow herself to feel the flutter of anticipation that came with knowing Jasper would arrive at 7 o'clock to escort her to the dance. Mrs. Caldwell knocked softly at her door. "Miss Marsh, your gentleman caller is here." The phrase, "gentleman caller," would have seemed impossible just 2 months ago, but now it sent a thrill of nervous excitement through Evelyn's chest. She took one final look in the mirror, smoothed her skirts, and made her way downstairs to where Jasper waited in the boarding-house parlor. He stood with his back to the staircase, examining one of Mrs. Caldwell's numerous doilies with the kind of bemused attention men typically reserved for feminine mysteries. When he heard her footsteps, he turned, and the expression that crossed his face made all her careful preparation worthwhile. "Evelyn," he said softly, and the single word carried more warmth than a dozen elaborate compliments. "You look beautiful." He wore a dark suit that had clearly been tailored specifically for his tall frame, and his hair had been recently trimmed, though she noticed he had allowed his tailor to leave it slightly longer than was strictly fashionable. The effect was distinguished without being fussy exactly right for a man of his position and character. "Thank you," she replied, accepting the light wrap he offered to protect her against the evening chill. "Shall we go face the lions?" His laugh was rich and genuine. "I've faced down rustlers, drought and cattle stampedes, but I'll admit the prospect of dancing with you in front of the entire town has me more nervous than all of those combined." The community hall had been transformed for the evening. Paper streamers hung from the rafters, and the usual arrangement of wooden chairs had been pushed back to create space for dancing. The ladies of the church auxiliary had outdone themselves with refreshments, and the small band consisting of a fiddle, guitar, and harmonica was already filling the air with lively melodies. As they entered, Evelyn felt the weight of dozens of pairs of eyes turning in their direction. Conversations paused mid-sentence, and she caught glimpses of knowing smiles, speculative glances, and the occasional disapproving frown from those who still questioned the propriety of their unconventional courtship. "Let them look," Jasper murmured in her ear, offering his arm with the same confident grace he brought to everything else. "We have nothing to hide and nothing to be ashamed of." The first hour passed pleasantly enough. They mingled with other couples, accepted congratulations from well-wishers, and deflected the more intrusive questions with polite but firm responses. Mayor Henderson made a point of introducing Jasper to several prominent ranchers from neighboring areas, clearly proud to claim the wealthy cattleman as a friend and future resident. But it was during a quiet moment, when they had stepped outside to escape the warmth and noise of the crowded hall, that the evening took an unexpected turn. "Miss Marsh," Jasper said, his voice carrying an uncertainty she had not heard before. "There's something I need to tell you. Something about my past that you deserve to know before our relationship progresses any further." The seriousness of his tone sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the autumn air. "What is it?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the star-filled sky, as if gathering courage for a difficult confession. "I told you that Margaret died in the cholera epidemic of '68, and that's true. But I didn't tell you everything about our marriage." Evelyn waited, her heart beginning to beat faster as she sensed that whatever he was about to reveal would be significant. "Margaret and your marriage wasn't the perfect union I may have led you to believe. We cared for each other, certainly, but we were very young when we wed, and we discovered that caring isn't always enough." He paused, running his hand through his hair, in a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of inner turmoil. "We had begun to drift apart in the months before she died. There were arguments, misunderstandings. I was working long hours trying to establish myself as a blacksmith, and she felt neglected. We had started to talk about whether we had made a mistake in marrying so quickly. The admission hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they wanted to cross. Evelyn felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief that his first marriage had not been the flawless romance she had imagined, guilt for feeling that relief, and a deeper understanding of why he approached the prospect of remarriage with such practical considerations. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because I don't want to build anything with you based on illusions," he said, turning to face her directly. "My marriage to Margaret taught me that good intentions and mutual affection aren't always sufficient for lasting happiness. I want something different this time, something built on honest understanding of who we are and what we need from each other." His honesty was both devastating and liberating. It stripped away the romantic mythology she had constructed around his first marriage, but it also opened the door for something more real and sustainable between them. "I appreciate your candor," she said finally. "And since we're being honest with each other, I should tell you that my marriage to Thomas wasn't the perfect union. I've sometimes made it out to be either. We were happy, but we were also very young, and I sometimes wonder if our contentment came more from inexperience than from deep compatibility." The admission felt like a betrayal of Thomas's memory, but also like a necessary step toward building something authentic with Jasper. They stood together in the darkness, two middle-aged people who had learned that love was more complicated than fairy tales suggested, but also more possible than they had dared to hope. When they returned to the hall, the music had shifted to a slower waltz, and Jasper extended his hand with a question in his eyes. "I should warn you," Evelyn said, as she accepted his invitation. "I haven't danced in over 15 years. "Then we'll learn together," he replied, leading her onto the floor with the same quiet confidence that had drawn her to him from the beginning. As they moved together to the gentle rhythm of the music, Evelyn felt the last of her resistance beginning to crumble. This was not the passionate romance of her youth, but something deeper and more sustainable: a partnership between two people who had learned the difference between dreams and reality and had chosen to build their future on honest ground. Around them, the good people of Dry River watched and whispered, but for the first time since Jasper's shocking proposal, Evelyn found that she didn't care what they thought. She was 57 years old, and she was dancing with a man who saw her not as a solution to a problem, but as a woman worthy of genuine affection and respect. The wedding ring beneath her dress seemed lighter somehow, as if Thomas himself were giving her permission to move forward into whatever future awaited her. The morning after the social, Evelyn woke with a lightness in her heart that she had not felt in years. The memory of dancing with Jasper, of the way he had looked at her as if she were the only woman in the room, filled her with a warmth that seemed to chase away the autumn chill from her small room. She was humming softly to herself as she prepared for the school day, when Mrs. Caldwell's urgent knock interrupted her morning routine. "Miss Marsh, you must come downstairs immediately," the older woman said, her voice tight with excitement and something that sounded suspiciously like alarm. "There's a man here to see you as stranger, and not a pleasant one, I'm afraid." Evelyn's stomach clenched with sudden apprehension. In her experience, unexpected visitors rarely brought good news, especially when they arrived at the boarding house before 8 o'clock in the morning. She made her way downstairs to find a man waiting in Mrs. Caldwell's parlour, thin, sharp-featured individual in an expensive suit that somehow managed to look predatory rather than prosperous. His dark hair was slicked back with pomade, and his small eyes moved constantly, taking in every detail of the modest room with obvious calculation. "Miss Marsh," he said, rising as she entered. His smile was all teeth and no warmth. "My name is Howard Blackwood. I believe we need to have a conversation about your relationship with Mr. Jasper Langley." The name meant nothing to Evelyn, but something in the man's manner made her instinctively wary. "I'm afraid I don't understand," Mr. Blackwood. What business could my personal affairs possibly be to you? Oh, but they are very much my business, Blackwood replied, settling back into his chair without invitation. You see, Miss Marsh, I'm in the process of challenging Mr. Langley's claim to the land on which his precious Double L Ranch sits. It's a complex legal matter involving original territorial grants and subsequent treaties with the local Indian tribes. Very boring stuff, I'm sure, but potentially quite lucrative for someone in my position. Evelyn felt the blood drain from her face, though she tried to maintain her composure. I still don't see what this has to do with me. Blackwood's smile widened, and he reached into his coat pocket to withdraw a thick sheaf of legal documents. These papers represent 18 months of careful research into the chain of title for Mr. Langley's holdings. What I've discovered is quite fascinating and potentially devastating to your suitor's financial position. He spread the documents on Mrs. Caldwell's small table, pointing to various sections with a manicured finger that somehow reminded Evelyn of a vulture's talon. The original land grant was issued to a Mexican rancher named Diego Vasquez in 1847. When the territory was transferred to the United States, there was supposed to be a formal process for confirming these Mexican grants. But in the chaos following the war, many such confirmations were overlooked. Despite her growing alarm, Evelyn found herself drawn into the legal complexity of what Blackwood was describing. Are you saying that Mr. Langley's title to his land is invalid? I'm saying that without proper documentation proving the transfer of title from Vasquez to the man who sold the land to Langley, the entire chain of ownership is questionable. And since Vasquez died without heir, so it was, believed the land should have reverted to territorial and later state ownership. Blackwood leaned back in his chair, obviously enjoying the effect his words were having. But here's where it gets interesting, Miss Marsh. I've recently discovered that Diego Vasquez did have an heir and nephew who emigrated to California and whose family has been quietly researching their inheritance rights. They've retained me to pursue their claim to the land. The implications of what he was saying began to sink in, and Evelyn felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. How much of Mr. Langley's land are we talking about? All of it, Blackwood said simply. The entire Double L Ranch, including the main house, outbuildings, and grazing rights. If my case is successful, and I have every reason to believe it will be, Mr. Jasper Langley will find himself not only landless but financially ruined. The investments he's made in improvements, cattle, and equipment will all be lost. Evelyn sank into a chair, her mind reeling from the magnitude of what she was hearing. Jasper's entire life, everything he had worked to build over 15 years, could be taken away by a legal technicality and the greed of strangers. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked weakly. "Because, my dear Miss Marsh, there is one factor that could significantly complicate my case," Blackwood continued, his voice taking on an almost conversational tone. The territorial laws regarding land disputes include provisions for protecting established family homesteads. A man with a wife and children, someone who has clearly established the land as a family home rather than merely a business venture, has certain protections under the law that a bachelor does not. The truth hit Evelyn like a physical blow. Jasper's marriage proposal had never been simply about companionship or even practical convenience. It had been about survival, about protecting everything he had built from exactly the kind of legal challenge that Blackwood was mounting. "I see you understand now," Blackwood said, observing her expression with satisfaction. "Mr. Langley needs a wife not for romantic reasons, but for legal ones. Marriage to a respectable woman like yourself would strengthen his position considerably and make my case much more difficult to win. You're suggesting that his entire courtship of me has been motivated by this legal threat." Evelyn's voice was barely above a whisper. "I'm not suggesting anything, Miss Marsh. I'm stating it as fact. Howard Blackwood makes it his business to know everything about his opponents, and I assure you that Mr. Langley has been aware of my investigation for months. His sudden interest in matrimony is hardly coincidental." Blackwood rose from his chair and began gathering his papers with the satisfied air of a man who had accomplished his objective. Of course, I felt it was only fair to inform you of the true circumstances before you made any irrevocable decisions about your future. A woman of your intelligence deserves to know whether she's being courted for love or for legal expediency. After he left, Evelyn sat in the parlor for nearly an hour, her mind struggling to process what she had learned. Everything about Jasper's courtship, his initial blunt proposal, his persistence despite her rejection, even his gradual shift to a more romantic approach now, appeared in a completely different light. Had any of it been real? The conversations about their shared losses, the gentle way he had helped Timothy with his reading, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her, were these simply the calculated actions of a desperate man trying to save his empire? The worst part was that she could not entirely blame him if that were the case. A man who had spent 15 years building something from nothing would naturally fight to preserve it by any means necessary. But the thought that she had been manipulated, that her growing feelings had been based on deception, was almost more than she could bear. When she finally made her way to the schoolhouse, she moved through the day's lessons like a woman in a dream. The children seemed to sense that something was wrong with their usually attentive teacher, but she managed to maintain enough composure to get through the required curriculum. It was late in the afternoon when she saw Jasper's familiar figure approaching the schoolhouse. Her heart, which had leaped with pleasure at the sight of him every day for weeks, now clenched with a mixture of longing and betrayal. "Evelyn," he said as he entered the classroom, his face brightening with the smile that had become so dear to her. "I wanted to thank you again for last evening. Dancing with you was—" "I know about Howard Blackwood," she said quietly, cutting off his words. The change in his expression was immediate and devastating. The warmth drained from his eyes, replaced by a look of trapped desperation that confirmed every one of her worst fears. "Evelyn, I can explain." "Can you?" she asked, rising from her desk with as much dignity as she could manage. "Can you explain why you never mentioned that your land was being challenged? Can you explain why you never told me that marriage to me might be the only thing standing between you and complete financial ruin? It's not that simple, isn't it?" The hurt and anger she had been holding in check finally broke free. "You told me yourself that you're a practical man, Mr. Langley. It seems you're even more practical than I realized." She moved toward the door, needing to escape before her composure crumbled entirely. "I think it would be best if you didn't call on me anymore. I won't be part of your legal strategy, no matter how charmingly you present it." "Evelyn, please," he called after her, but she had already stepped out into the afternoon air, leaving him alone in the schoolhouse with the wreckage of everything they had built together. That night, she sat in her room with Blackwood's legal documents spread before her, trying to understand the full scope of what Jasper was facing. The papers were complex, filled with legal terminology that was difficult to follow, but the basic facts were clear enough. The man she had begun to love was fighting for his very survival, and she had been nothing more than a weapon in that fight. 3 weeks passed in a haze of wounded pride and sleepless nights. Evelyn threw herself into her teaching with renewed dedication, as if the familiar routines of education could somehow shield her from the ache that had settled permanently in her chest. She avoided the general store during the hours when Jasper might be in town, took her meals in her room rather than face the speculation in Mrs. Caldwell's eyes, and declined the well-meaning invitations from neighbors who clearly sensed that something had gone terribly wrong between the schoolteacher and the cattleman. The children, bless them, seemed to understand that their teacher needed gentleness during this difficult time. Even young Billy Thompson, usually the most rambunctious of her students, worked quietly at his arithmetic without his usual protests about the difficulty of long division. It was during this period of self-imposed isolation that Miguel Vasquez appeared at the schoolhouse one afternoon, his usually cheerful demeanor replaced by obvious concern. "Señorita Marsh," he said, removing his hat as he stepped into the classroom. "I hope you will forgive the intrusion, but I must speak with you about Jasper." Evelyn's hands stilled on the papers she had been grading. "Mr. Vasquez, I don't think that would be appropriate. Mr. Langley and I are no longer—" "Please," Miguel interrupted, his voice carrying an urgency that made her look up. "I know something has happened between you, and I know it has to do with that snake Blackwood. But there are things you should know things Jasper is too proud to tell you himself." Despite her resolve to put Jasper Langley behind her, Evelyn found herself curious about what Miguel felt was so important. "What kind of things?" Miguel glanced around the empty classroom, then moved closer to her desk, lowering his voice as if afraid of being overheard. "Did you know that when Jenny Patterson's father broke his leg last spring and couldn't work for 6 weeks, it was Jasper who made sure the family had food and medicine? He told them it was an advance on future wages, but there was never any intention of collecting it." Evelyn frowned. Jenny's father, Tom Patterson, worked odd jobs around town and had struggled to support his family even before his injury. She had wondered how they had managed during his recovery, but had assumed it was help from the church or neighbors. "And Mrs. Wilson, the widow who lives in that little shack on the edge of town. Every winter, someone mysteriously pays her rent and leaves firewood stacked by her door. She thinks it's charity from the church auxiliary, but it's Jasper, has been for 3 years." Each revelation was like a small stone thrown into the still water of Evelyn's certainty about Jasper's motives. The man Miguel described sounded like the gentle soul who had carved a wooden horse for Timothy, not the calculating businessman she had accused of using her for legal advantage. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked softly. "Because he's dying inside," Miguel said bluntly. "I've worked for Jasper for 8 years, and I've never seen him like this. He won't eat, barely sleeps, and spends his days riding the fence lines like he's trying to memorize every inch of land before it's taken away from him." Miguel leaned forward, his weathered hands gripping the edge of her desk. "Señorita, I was there when he first heard about Blackwood's challenge. It was 6 months ago, long before he ever came to town looking for a wife. He was devastated not just about losing the land, but about what it would mean for all the people who depend on the ranch for their livelihood." "6 months ago?" Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. "See, and you want to know what he said that day? He said, 'Miguel, if I lose this place, what happens to you and Carmen? What happens to the 20 men who work for me and their families? I can start over, but some of them are too old, and others have nowhere else to go.'" The image Miguel painted was of a man crushed by the weight of responsibility for others, not someone scheming to manipulate a lonely schoolteacher. But if that were true, then why hadn't Jasper told her about the legal challenge himself? "There's something else," Miguel continued. "Last week, Jasper asked me to help him go through his paper's legal documents, financial records, that sort of thing. He was preparing for the worst, making arrangements for his workers in case he loses everything, and I found this." From his coat pocket, Miguel withdrew a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age and creased from handling. He placed it on Evelyn's desk, with the reverence usually reserved for sacred objects. "It's a letter," he explained, "an unfinished letter that Jasper found among your husband's belongings when he died. The lawyer who handled the estate thought you should have it, but somehow it got mixed up with other papers and was never delivered." Evelyn's heart began to pound as she recognized Thomas's careful handwriting on the envelope. "For my beloved Evelyn, to be opened only in the event of my death." With trembling fingers, she unfolded the letter and began to read. "My dearest Evelyn, if you are reading this, then the fever has taken me, and you are facing the world alone. I know how difficult this must be for you, my darling, but I cannot bear the thought of leaving you without saying the things that have been in my heart. First, you must know that our 3 years together have been the greatest joy of my life. You gave me a love I never thought possible, and the memory of your laughter will sustain me wherever I am going. But more than that, I want you to know that I do not expect you to spend the rest of your life mourning me. You are only 32 years old, Evelyn, with so much love left to give. If you find someone who can make you happy, truly happy, please do not let the ghost of our marriage prevent you from embracing that joy. I have seen too many widows and widowers waste their remaining years in devotion to the dead when they could be building new happiness with the living. Do not be one of them, my love. Find someone who cherishes you as I have cherished you, and do not feel that loving again is a betrayal of what we shared. You have my blessing, my permission, and my eternal love. Your devoted husband, Thomas." The letter blurred as tears filled Evelyn's eyes. For 15 years, she had carried the weight of imagined obligation to Thomas's memory, convinced that moving forward would somehow diminish what they had shared. But here, in his own hand, was his explicit wish for her happiness and fulfillment. "How did Jasper come to have this?" she asked through her tears. "The lawyer who settled your husband's estate was an old friend of Jasper's from Missouri," Miguel explained gently. "When the man died last year, his files were transferred to another attorney, and that's when the letter was discovered. Jasper recognized your name and knew it belonged to you. But why didn't he give it to me immediately?" Miguel's weathered face creased with something that might have been a smile. "Because he's a fool when it comes to matters of the heart, señorita. He was afraid that giving you the letter would look like manipulation, like he was trying to use your dead husband's words to win your affection. So he held on to it, planning to give it to you after you had accepted his proposal for your own reasons." The complexity of Jasper's position began to become clear to Evelyn. He had been caught between his genuine feelings for her and the practical necessity of marriage for legal protection. But rather than using Thomas's letter as leverage, he had chosen to court her without that advantage, hoping to win her affection honestly. "There's more you should know," Miguel continued. "The legal challenge, yes, it's real, and yes, marriage would strengthen Jasper's position. But it wouldn't save him, señorita. Even with a wife, Blackwood's case is strong. Jasper knows this. His lawyer has told him that his chances are poor, regardless of his marital status." "Then why?" "Because he loves you," Miguel said simply. "Whatever practical benefits marriage might provide, they're secondary to the fact that he genuinely wants to spend his life with you. I've seen him with other women over the years, women who would have been perfectly suitable wives for a man in his position. He was never more than polite to any of them. But with you, señorita, I have never seen him so happy as he was during those weeks when you were walking out together." Evelyn sat in silence, trying to reconcile this new information with her wounded certainty about Jasper's motives. Could she have been wrong? Could his feelings for her have been genuine, despite the circumstances that made marriage advantageous? "The hearing is scheduled for next week," Miguel said, rising from his chair. "Jasper will face Blackwood's challenge, whether you forgive him or not. But I thought you should know the whole truth before you decide whether he deserves to face it alone." After Miguel left, Evelyn sat for a long time with Thomas's letter in her hands, reading and rereading his words of love and liberation. The man she had mourned for 15 years was giving her permission, even encouraging her to find happiness again. More than that, he was warning her against the very mistake she had been making, allowing devotion to the dead to prevent joy with the living. As the afternoon light faded, she found herself thinking not about what Jasper might have done wrong, but about what she might have missed. In her hurt and anger, had she been too quick to assume the worst about his motives? Had her own fear of being vulnerable again made her eager to find reasons to push him away? The wooden horse he had carved for Timothy still sat on her desk, a reminder of the gentleness she had seen in him from the very beginning. A man who would spend his evenings carving toys for children was not someone whose every action was calculated for personal gain. Tomorrow, she decided, she would seek the truth not from wounded pride or defensive anger, but from the love that Thomas had urged her to embrace. Whether that truth led to reconciliation or final goodbye, she owed it to herself and to Jasper to face it with an open heart. The legal hearing that would determine Jasper's fate was only days away, and regardless of what had transpired between them, she could not bear the thought of him facing that challenge entirely alone. The territorial courthouse in Cheyenne was an imposing stone building that seemed designed to intimidate those who entered seeking justice. Evelyn had never been inside such a place, and as she climbed the wide steps on the morning of Jasper's hearing, she felt her resolve waver for a moment. The teaching certificate she carried in her small handbag, the document that proved her qualifications and independence, seemed suddenly fragile against the weight of legal proceedings and powerful men. She had not told anyone of her intention to attend the hearing, not Mrs. Caldwell, who would have peppered her with questions about her change of heart. Not Mayor Henderson, who had offered to accompany her if she wished to support Jasper. This was something she needed to do alone, a decision that belonged entirely to her. The courtroom was already crowded when she arrived. She recognized several faces from Dry River Mayor Henderson, Dr. Matthews, and other prominent citizens who had come to support Jasper. Miguel sat in the front row with his wife Carmen, their faces grave with worry. At the defendant's table, Jasper sat with his attorney, a dignified older man whose expensive suit suggested competence but could not mask the tension in his posture. Jasper himself looked haggard, as if the weeks since their confrontation had aged him years. His usually impeccable appearance showed signs of strain. His suit was wrinkled, his hair less perfectly groomed than usual. But when he turned slightly in his chair, surveying the courtroom, his gaze found hers with an expression of shock and something that looked dangerously like hope. Howard Blackwood sat at the plaintiff's table, his sharp features animated with the confidence of a man who believed victory was assured. Beside him sat a younger man with olive skin and dark hair, who must be the supposed heir to the original Mexican land grant. The man looked uncomfortable, shifting nervously in his chair, as if he would rather be anywhere else. The judge, a stern-faced man in his 60s, called the proceedings to order with the kind of authority that immediately silenced the murmur of conversation in the crowded room. This court will hear the case of Vasquez versus Langley, regarding disputed ownership of approximately 12,000 acres, currently known as the Double L Ranch, he announced. Mr. Blackwood, you may present your case. For the next 2 hours, Evelyn listened as Blackwood methodically laid out his argument. He presented maps, deeds, and testimony from experts who had researched the original Mexican land grants. His case was compelling in its attention to detail, and she could see the worry deepening on the faces of Jasper's supporters as each piece of evidence was presented. The supposed heir, introduced as Carlos Vasquez, testified briefly about his family's history and their recent discovery of their potential claim to the land. But his testimony lacked the passion Evelyn would have expected from someone fighting for his rightful inheritance. Instead, he seemed to be reciting prepared statements with little personal investment in their outcome. When it came time for Jasper's defense, his attorney did his best with the limited evidence available. He presented documents showing Jasper's purchase of the land, the improvements he had made, and the legitimacy of his ownership under current territorial law. But even to Evelyn's untrained eye, it was clear that the defense was struggling against the weight of Blackwood's research. It was then that she realized no one would speak to Jasper's character, to the kind of man he was and what he had built on the disputed land. The legal arguments were about paperwork and technicalities, but they said nothing about the community he had created, the people he employed, or the lives that would be destroyed if he lost everything. Without fully realizing she had made the decision, Evelyn found herself rising from her seat in the gallery. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent courtroom, "I request permission to speak on behalf of Mr. Langley." The judge frowned, clearly surprised by the interruption. "Miss, this is not a character hearing. The court is concerned only with matters of legal ownership." "But surely the court is interested in the truth, Your Honor," Evelyn replied, drawing upon every ounce of confidence she had developed during her years of teaching. "And the truth is that this case is not simply about old land grants and legal technicalities. It's about justice and what constitutes rightful ownership in a civilized society." Jasper's attorney leaned over to whisper something urgent to his client, but Jasper waved him off, his eyes fixed on Evelyn with an expression of amazement and gratitude. "I'll allow it," the judge said finally, "but keep your remarks brief and relevant, miss." Evelyn moved to the front of the courtroom, her teaching certificate clutched in her hand like a talisman. This document represented everything she had achieved, independently her education, her profession, her ability to support herself without depending on any man. But today, she was choosing to use that independence not to protect herself, but to protect the man she loved. "Your Honor, my name is Evelyn Marsh, and I am the schoolteacher in Dry River." I hold a certificate from the Kansas Normal School and have been educating children on the frontier for over 15 years. She held up the document, its official seal catching the morning sunlight that streamed through the courtroom windows. I mention my qualifications not to impress this court, but to establish that I am a woman of independent means and sound judgment. What I am about to tell you comes not from desperation or financial need, but from a clear understanding of what constitutes justice and rightful ownership. She paused, looking directly at Jasper before turning back to the judge. I know Jasper Langley, Your Honor. I know him as a man who has spent 15 years turning wasteland into a productive ranch that supports not only himself, but 20 working families and their children. I know him as someone who quietly helps widows pay their rent and ensures that injured workers continue to receive wages when they cannot perform their duties. Her voice grew stronger as she continued, fueled by the conviction that had brought her to this courtroom. Most importantly, I know him as a man who asked me to be his wife not because he needed a business arrangement or legal convenience, but because he recognized in me a partner worthy of his respect and affection. The courtroom was absolutely silent now, every person present hanging on her words. Even Blackwood had stopped shuffling through his papers to listen. I am here today to announce my engagement to Jasper Langley, she said, her voice ringing with certainty. Not because he needs a wife to strengthen his legal position, but because I choose to bind my life to a man of honor, integrity, and genuine accomplishment. The Double L Ranch is not stolen land. It is the product of one man's vision, hard work, and commitment to building something lasting and good. The silence following Evelyn's declaration stretched for what felt like an eternity before the judge cleared his throat and leaned forward in his chair. Miss Marsh, while your testimony speaks well of Mr. Langley's character, I'm afraid character references cannot override questions of legal title. This court must base its decision on documented evidence, not personal opinions about the defendant's worthiness. But Evelyn was not finished. The weeks of hurt and reflection had crystallized into a clarity of purpose that would not be deterred by judicial skepticism. Your Honor, with respect, I believe documented evidence is exactly what I can provide. She reached into her handbag and withdrew a small bundle of papers. These are letters and receipts that I have collected from the citizens of Dry River evidence of Mr. Broats, the citizens of Rye. Langley's contributions to our community that establish his legitimate claim to residency and investment in the territory. She handed the papers to the court clerk, who passed them to the judge. You will find documented proof of Mr. Langley's employment of territorial residents, his payments for goods and services to local businesses, and his tax contributions to the territorial government. This is not a man who has stolen land, Your Honor. This is a man who has invested his life and fortune in building something that benefits the entire territory. The judge examined the papers with growing interest, while Blackwood shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This was clearly not a development he had anticipated. Furthermore, Evelyn continued, her voice gaining strength from the conviction of her words, I would ask this court to consider the suspicious circumstances surrounding this claim. Mr. Carlos Vasquez, the supposed heir, has lived his entire life in California with no previous knowledge of or interest in his alleged inheritance. Yet suddenly, after Mr. Langley has spent 15 years improving this land, making it valuable, a claim appears through the offices of Mr. Blackwood, a man known throughout the territory for his aggressive acquisition of disputed properties. A murmur ran through the courtroom as the implication of her words sank in. Blackwood rose from his chair, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, I object to these baseless accusations about my client's motives and my professional reputation. But the judge was studying the papers Evelyn had provided, and when he looked up, his expression had changed subtly. Mr. Blackwood, these documents do raise questions about the timing of your client's claim. Can you explain why Mr. Vasquez waited until the land had been significantly improved before asserting his supposed inheritance rights? For the first time since the hearing began, Blackwood appeared uncertain. Your Honor, My client only recently became aware of his potential claim through genealogical research. Research that you funded and directed, Evelyn interjected, her teaching experience having taught her the value of pressing an advantage when the truth was on her side. Research that coincidentally began only after Mr. Langley's ranch became one of the most prosperous in the territory. The judge turned his attention to Carlos Vasquez, who had grown increasingly pale during this exchange. Mr. Vasquez, can you tell this court in your own words why you believe you have a legitimate claim to land you have never seen and never knew existed until recently? The young man fidgeted with his hat, clearly uncomfortable with the direct question. Well, Your Honor, Mr. Blackwood explained that my great-uncle Diego had owned this land, and that as his heir, I had rights to it. And what do you know about your great-uncle Diego? Not much, sir. My family never talked about him. Mr. Blackwood did all the research and told me about the inheritance. The judge's frown deepened. Mr. Blackwood, is it correct that you approached Mr. Vasquez about this claim rather than the other way around? Blackwood's smooth confidence was beginning to crack. Your Honor, I was conducting research into various disputed land claims throughout the territory. When I discovered the potential irregularity in Mr. Langley's title, I felt it was my duty to locate any living heirs. At your own expense? The judge interrupted. And what compensation arrangement have you made with Mr. Vasquez should this case be successful? The question hung in the air like smoke from a gun, and Evelyn could see that even Blackwood realized he had been cornered. The truth that he had offered to fund the case in exchange for a significant percentage of any recovered land would reveal the speculative nature of the entire proceeding. It was then that Jasper rose from his seat, and when he spoke, his voice carried the quiet authority that Evelyn had come to love. Your Honor, if I may address the court directly. At the judge's nod, Jasper moved to stand beside Evelyn, and she felt the warmth of his presence like a shelter from the storm. I purchased my land in good faith 15 years ago, paying fair market value to the man who held legal title under territorial law. I have improved that land, employed dozens of men, and contributed to the growth and prosperity of the territory. But more than that, I have made it my home. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a simple gold band knot, ornate or expensive, but clearly chosen with care and consideration. Miss Marsh has honored me beyond measure by accepting my proposal of marriage. This ring represents not a business arrangement or legal strategy, but a commitment between two people who have chosen to build a life together. If this court decides that my legal title is insufficient, I will accept that decision. But I will not accept the implication that my love for this woman or my investment in this land is anything less than genuine. He turned to Evelyn, his storm-grey eyes reflecting a mixture of love, gratitude, and hope that took her breath away. Evelyn, I know I handled everything badly from the beginning. I know I should have told you about the legal challenge from the start, but I want you to know that everything I felt for you, everything we built together, was real. Will you marry me not as a legal convenience, but as my partner in whatever future awaits us? The proposal was simple, honest, and delivered in a courtroom filled with strangers. Yet it was the most romantic moment of Evelyn's life. This was not the practical arrangement he had first suggested, but a declaration of love from a man willing to lose everything rather than win through deception. Yes, she said, her voice clear and certain. Yes, I'll marry you, Jasper Langley, whatever the future may hold. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Evelyn felt the last of her doubts disappear. This was not the passionate romance of her youth, but something deeper and more sustainable, a partnership between two people who had learned the difference between dreams and reality and had chosen to build their future on honest ground. 6 months later, the sound of a new school bell rang across the Double L Ranch, calling the children of the surrounding area to their lessons. The bronze bell, a wedding gift from Jasper to his bride, hung from a sturdy oak post beside the one-room schoolhouse he had built near the main house, close enough for Evelyn to continue her teaching while being part of the ranch community she had grown to love. The legal hearing had ended with Judge Morrison ruling in Jasper's favor, citing the suspicious timing of the claim and the lack of credible evidence that Carlos Vasquez had any legitimate connection to the original land grant. Blackwood had stormed from the courtroom in defeat, taking his fabricated heir with him, and neither had been seen in the territory since. The Double L Ranch remained securely in Jasper's possession, but more importantly to both of them, their engagement had been sealed by genuine love rather than legal necessity. Evelyn stood in the doorway of her new schoolhouse, watching as Jenny Patterson helped young Timothy with his reading. The boy had made remarkable progress since receiving Jasper's carved horse, and his confidence had grown along with his skills. Several other wooden animals now decorated the classroom testament to Jasper's continued evening carving sessions, though these days he shared his workshop time with his wife, who had discovered an unexpected talent for painting the delicate figures he created. "How are the scholars progressing today, Mrs. Langley?" came Jasper's familiar voice from behind her. Even after 3 months of marriage, the sound of her new name still sent a flutter of pleasure through Evelyn's chest. She turned to find her husband approaching with the easy stride of a man comfortable in his own domain, his hat tipped back, and a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Very well indeed, Mr. Langley," she replied, using the formal address they had playfully adopted for their public interactions. In private, they were simply Jasper and Evelyn, but in front of the children and the ranch hands, they maintained the gentle courtesy that had characterized their unconventional courtship. "I have news that might interest you," Jasper said, leaning against the doorframe with the casual grace she had come to cherish. "Mayor Henderson rode out this morning with a letter from the Territorial Education Board. It seems they're so impressed with our little school that they want to use it as a model for other ranch communities." Evelyn felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with personal recognition and everything to do with the satisfaction of work well done. The school served not only the children of Jasper's workers, but youngsters from 3 neighboring ranches, creating an educational opportunity that would never have existed in the scattered isolation of individual homesteads. "That's wonderful news," she said, then added with a teasing smile, "though I suspect they're more impressed with the quality of the schoolhouse than the teacher. That bell you commissioned is the envy of every educator in the territory." "The bell is nothing compared to the teacher," Jasper replied, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he reserved for moments when they were essentially alone. "I may have provided the building, but you've created something magical here, Evelyn. These children are getting an education that rivals anything they could receive in Denver or Cheyenne." It was true, and they both knew it. Evelyn's years of experience, combined with the resources Jasper could provide and the stability of the ranch setting, had created an educational environment that attracted families from miles around. Some children boarded during the week with ranch families, returning home on weekends, while others made the daily journey on horseback or in wagons. As the afternoon lessons ended and the children dispersed to their various homes, Evelyn and Jasper walked together toward the main house, following a routine that had become as comfortable as breathing. The house that had once felt empty and echoing with loneliness now hummed with the quiet contentment of a true home. Carmen had dinner waiting, a combination of her Mexican specialties and the traditional American dishes from Evelyn's mother's recipe book. The blending of culinary traditions had become a symbol of how seamlessly their different worlds had merged into something new and better than either had imagined. After dinner, they settled onto the wide front porch, where Jasper had placed 2 rocking chairs, positioned to catch the evening breeze and provide the best view of the sunset over the distant mountains. This had become their favorite time of day, period of quiet conversation and shared reflection that reminded Evelyn of the evening reading sessions she had treasured with Thomas, but with a deeper intimacy born of mature understanding. "I had a letter from Mrs. Caldwell today," Evelyn mentioned as she opened her Bible to the familiar page. The pressed wildflower from her first wedding was still there, but now it was accompanied by a second bloomer prairie rose from her wedding bouquet that Jasper had gathered on their wedding morning. "And what news does our former landlady share?" Jasper asked, settling into his own chair with the piece of wood. He was currently carving a small deer that would eventually join the menagerie in the schoolhouse. She wanted me to know that 3 more couples in Dry River have announced engagements since our wedding. She's convinced that our example has inspired a romantic epidemic among the town's bachelor population. Jasper chuckled, a sound that never failed to warm Evelyn's heart. I'm not sure our courtship should serve as anyone's model. Most couples probably prefer not to have their romantic negotiations conducted in full view of a territorial courthouse. Perhaps not, Evelyn agreed. But I think we've proven that love can bloom at any age, under any circumstances, if 2 people are willing to be honest with each other and patient with themselves. She closed the Bible gently, her fingers tracing the leather binding that had belonged to her mother and would someday, perhaps, belong to children of her own, if not biological children. Then the countless students who had become like family to her over the years. Do you ever regret it? Jasper asked quietly, his carving knife pausing in its work. Giving up your independence, your boarding house room, your completely autonomous life. It was a question he asked periodically, not from insecurity but from genuine concern for her happiness. He understood better than most men the value of independence to a woman who had supported herself for so many years. Never, Evelyn replied without hesitation. Independence is valuable, but partnership is precious. I've learned the difference between being alone by choice and being alone by circumstance. I chose to be alone for 15 years, and that choice served me well. But now I choose to share my life with you, and that choice serves me even better. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson that rivaled any masterpiece, Evelyn reflected on the journey that had brought her to this porch. This man, this unexpected happiness. She had thought her story was over at 57, that the best chapters of her life were behind her. Instead, she had discovered that sometimes the most beautiful stories begin not with passionate youth, but with the wisdom that comes from having lived long enough to recognize genuine love when it finally arrives. The new school bell would ring again tomorrow, calling children to their lessons and marking another day in the life she and Jasper were building together. But tonight, as they rocked gently in the evening breeze and planned their shared future, Evelyn knew that she had found something rarer than passionate romance or financial security. She had found a true partner for the journey ahead, whatever it might bring.